The following program contains distressing scenes.
In the early hours of September the 21st, 2016, in Dearborn, Michigan, a rage-filled father unleashed a nightmare on his unsuspecting family.
He made his wife watch while he shot and killed her 2 teenage children. I can't imagine anything more cruel.
I'm yelling to him like, no, no, my baby. But I was begging him not to shoot her because once he shot her in the back, she was bleeding from her mouth and I knew she wasn't gonna make it.
The killer was 49-year-old Gregory Green, and his reign of terror was far from over.
He carried the 2 other girls out to the garage, placed them in the car, tucked them in, shut the door, and turned the car on. And they ultimately succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning.
It was probably the most horrific crime that I've ever seen or dealt with during my career.
But astonishingly, this wasn't the first time Gregory Green had killed his family.
Back in 1991, he killed his first wife, and not only her, but also the unborn child, his child, that she was carrying.
The man who killed his family twice would forever come to be known as one of the world's most evil killers. In 2017, 50-year-old Gregory Green was ordered to spend the rest of his natural life in prison for the murders of his 2 stepchildren, 19-year-old Chadney and 17-year-old Cara, and his 2 biological daughters, 5-year-old Coy and Kaylee, who was just 4.
His final act of power over Faith Green, Gregory Green, allowed her to live and forced her to witness the murder of her children. And that gave him the power in his mind to manipulate her and make her live with these horrific memories for the rest of her life.
I don't understand the mentality, but it seemed like torture to me.
There was no trial. For the second time in his life, Gregory Green pled guilty to the murder of his family.
This case is a perfect example that shows how incredibly dangerous coercively controlling people can become. Those children were totally dispensable, irrespective of whether they were stepchildren or biological children. I have got to make this woman pay. You lot can pay with your lives so that I can restore my ego. How evil is that?
This killer's story begins in Michigan on October the 12th, 1966.
Gregory Green was born in Dearborn on the outskirts of Detroit. And in fact, he spent his entire life in Dearborn. We don't know a great deal about Green's upbringing, but we do know that it was a loving household, brought up with his mother and father and siblings, and I think he described it later in life as a comfortable upbringing.
Green's second wife, Faith, remembers him talking about his childhood.
He said that, like in high school, he always had nice things. There were times, like, if he didn't want to go to school, he didn't have to.
By his early 20s, Green had married his first wife, Tonya, and joined a church community on the outskirts of Detroit, led by Faith's father, Pastor Fred Harris.
As a little girl, I loved going to church. My dad became a pastor when I was about 11.
It was at church where Faith first met the man who would turn out to be her future husband.
I was 14 years old. At that time, he was probably about 24, 25. He had no clue that I had a crush on him. I thought that he was cute, things like that. I used to just say hi to him, sometimes after church, sit next to him. He was there for a while, then he wasn't there anymore.
In 1991, unbeknownst to 14-year-old Faith, Gregory Green had been sent to prison for killing his wife, Tonya.
On the 14th of July, Green attacked Tonya. And at that point, she was 6 months pregnant with Green's child. He attacked her brutally, ferociously, stabbing her in the face, chest, neck, back, killing not only Tonya, but also the unborn child. Certainly one of the factors that triggered Green's behaviour was the fact that she was planning to divorce him. I don't think Green wanted anybody else to have Tonya. If he couldn't have her, no one else was going to have her.
Gregory Green calmly dialed 911 to report what he'd done and waited for the police to arrive and arrest him.
It's really interesting when looking at the emotional state of people who kill somebody close to them, like a wife or a child. The first emotion they feel afterwards is relief. Not remorse, not shame, not guilt, not terror, relief. So they can, in that moment, behave quite rationally, but overlay that with the fact that they have felt completely justified in killing their wife for trying to leave them.
Gregory Green pled no contest to the crime of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years and a maximum of 25 years in the Michigan Department of Corrections.
While Green was serving his sentence for the murder of Tonya, the woman who was to become his second wife was going about an ordinary life. In fact, she'd got married and she had 2 children.
I met Karen Chaney's dad in the 10th grade, and immediately I just fell for him. And then once I graduated from high school, that's when we really started dating. And then I got pregnant with my son when I was 19. He was, I shouldn't say like my little buddy, but he was like me. He was a night owl. Even when I carried him, he was up at night. That's just how I was. So he was just a quiet child, and we did a lot together. He was very smart and artistic till he started drawing when he was really little.
Another child followed quickly. When her son, Chadney, was almost 2 years old, Faith gave birth to a daughter, Cara.
Cara was always the type of child where whatever her brother did, she wanted to be able to do it too. When he was learning to tie his shoes, she was like, I can do it too. She always wanted to boss him. So I always had to tell her, like, Cara, you know, stop bossing your brother around. He just wanted to play his games and things like that. But as they got older, the relationship got better.
Meanwhile, Gregory Green had been serving time in prison for the murder of his first wife. Most of his adult life had been spent behind bars. But in 2005, a push to give him a second chance gained momentum.
Green, as was typical of him, maintained an absolutely calm presence in prison. But he was refused parole 4 times because he showed no empathy and no remorse whatever for killing Tonya and his unborn child.
After that first murder, Gregory Green was a walking threat to any woman that he was going to get into a relationship with, especially if that woman challenges him or attempts to leave him.
Green had been in prison for a considerable period of time when Pastor Fred Harris, who was a well-known figure in Detroit, began a campaign to get him released. Harris told the parole board that Green would be supported by the local community and welcomed back into the church. What he didn't do, and that's so significant later, he didn't warn his daughter Faith exactly what Green had done and why he'd been in prison.
In 2008, after 16 years behind bars, Gregory Green was granted parole at the age of 41. He had a chance to start over, But his insatiable lust for murder could not be controlled, and eventually he would kill again. In 2008, Gregory Green had just been released from prison after spending 16 years behind bars for the murder of his first wife and their unborn child. When Faith, who was single again, ran into him at church, old feelings resurfaced.
At first, he didn't even know who I was until I told him. Then he was like, oh, okay, you know. He didn't even have a clue that I had like this crush on him. And a few times, like after church, I would talk to him. And then eventually we exchanged numbers. One day we went out to dinner, just talked. The kids seemed like they liked him. And we just eventually started dating.
Tragically, Faith wasn't aware of Green's crime when he was released. Her father didn't tell her, and I'm absolutely sure in my own mind that Green didn't tell her either. As far as she was concerned, with the help of her father, Green was being rehabilitated.
I probably should have asked more questions. I did know that he had went to prison. We were told there was some type of altercation, but it was self-defense.
Any allegations made against him, he's going to deny. He's going to minimize. He's going to make it look like he was the victim. This is something that is so common. They call it DAVO. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Now that is straight from the coercive control playbook.
He moved in with me for a little bit, but I was just feeling like something wasn't right. I don't know if it was just too soon. I ended up breaking it off with him for a while. I didn't talk to him for a little bit, and then we started talking back, and then that's how I got pregnant with Coy. Like, we weren't even in a relationship or anything like that. A couple months after I had Coy, that's when we ended up getting married.
In 2011, Green and his new wife moved into their first house together.
The city of Dearborn Heights is pretty much a bedroom community. Borders the city of Detroit on the east side of the city. Nice place to live, pretty safe. It's a good community, very eclectic, very diverse.
It didn't take long for Faith to realize that Green perhaps wasn't quite as angelic as she might have thought. And quite quickly, she became unsettled.
I didn't really know what was going on with him on the inside. He just would shut down. That's when I started to see the attitude and things like that.
Coercive control is a pattern of behavior designed to trap someone in a relationship. And that will be the motivation of the controlling person. So they will do all sorts of things within that relationship, what we call tactics, to make sure that person stays where they are, stays compliant, never leaves.
Everything was just Coy, Coy, Coy. He would tell me things like, if I leave the house, I gotta take her with me. He didn't really want to give me a break. There was only one time during that first year where I was able to go out with one of my friends, and then he was calling me. I'm like, it only had been literally probably like an hour, hour and a half, and I was getting ready to be back on my way home.
Green was incredibly controlling of Faith. He tried to isolate her from forms of support and influence. He would have used psychological tactics where he would demean her and question her so that she was constantly trying to meet his expectations and his rules. He will be presenting that as very normal. That's the way of things. You've got your role, I've got mine. You get on with yours, and as long as you do it properly, I'll leave you alone.
Like many women in that situation, Faith stayed with Green for the sake of her daughter.
Coy was funny. She thought she knew it all. She loved wearing dresses, loved wearing dresses. That was her thing.
Almost 2 years after Coy was born, Green and Faith had a second daughter, Kaylee.
Somehow Green didn't take to the second daughter as much as he'd taken to the first.
When she came, he didn't want anything to do with her. I don't know if it was because you didn't want another child. I can even take that if that's what it was, you know? I mean, I don't have to like it, but make it make sense. It got to the point where it was really tense in the house.
The home was a well-kept home, nice area. By all accounts, you know, just a good family living in a quiet suburb, raising their kids. So kind of goes to the heart of what we deal with in policing every day. You never know what's going on behind closed doors.
Despite Green's apparent indifference to his second daughter, Kaylee was adored by Faith.
Kaylee, Kaylee was a little rambunctious. She was glued to my hip. She was observant. She sat back and watched. When her dad was mean to her, I used to say, let's pray. And then she would tell me, Mommy, let's pray. There was a couple times he flinched at her and she would stand up to him. No baby should have to do that, you know. One night, I was sitting on the couch and he's yelling, hollering, just saying demeaning things to me, calling me names, but he's holding coy. So I'm like, can you please just put her down? So finally, I got him to put her down. Then he starts yelling, he starts kicking the couch. Kaylee's on this end. I'm like, please stop kicking the couch. That was my point there. I was just like, I have to leave.
Faith attempted to get a personal protection order against her husband.
I tried to go to the Dearborn Heights Police Department to file a PPO. I filled out the paperwork. They came back less than 5 minutes and told me it's not enough information.
People don't go and get protective orders for nothing. They don't apply for them for nothing. But for some reason, probably a lack of evidence, I would have thought, that protective order was not granted.
Domestic violence is one of those crimes that are unpoliceable. And that's one of the things that the police hate. We want to protect the public. We want to do what's out there. But the law, everybody thinks it's black and white. It's really not.
I decided to go back to work, and I said I'm just going to make a plan and leave on the last day of school, and that's what I did.
After Faith left her husband, they lived apart for a couple of years.
I did file for divorce, and we were at one of our, I guess, divorce proceedings, and then I felt like we needed to talk. I didn't think like we were going to talk to get back together, but that's what ended up happening. So I said, well, this time we really need to talk about things in detail. And I felt like that's what we were really doing. I felt like he was making an effort.
This is a controlling and manipulative person. So they will use any tactic they think of that is going to work for them to get what they want. Faith would probably have believed him that he was genuine, that he was going to change. They never do.
In 2014, Green and Faith reunited, and eventually she moved back into the family home with her 4 children. It would prove to be a fatal mistake.
It was okay for a few months. He wanted the girls and everybody to have a good Christmas, so we got this huge Christmas tree that went up to the ceiling, bring all the toys and everything in the house. We were talking about renewing our vows, but things were just slowly dwindling. I was just like, oh, this is not gonna work.
Green would never have been able to sustain this character that he was playing. Once he got what he wanted, gone, forget it. This is not who he is. Who he is a manipulative, abusive controller.
As time went on, he was getting worse. So this time, I'm dead set. I'm like, I can't change my mind. I can't continue to put my children through this.
In August 2016, Faith filed for divorce for a second time.
Statistically, the period of separation or the threat of separation in a relationship where there's intimate partner violence is the most dangerous time for a victim. And the reason for that is because it's not about violence, it's about power and control. So when the abuser in the relationship feels that they're losing that power and control, their behavior ramps up and can become much, much more violent.
Next thing I know, he's mad. He was just really upset, cursing, just real belligerent, and then eventually he left and went to work. And I thought I was going to be all right because the most Greg ever did was just yell, holler, maybe be in my face. I just continued to go on about my day as usual.
It was at that point Gregory Green felt he ultimately lost control of the situation. And she was going to take his home, she was going to take his children, and he was not going to permit that to happen.
It would be less than a month after he was served his divorce papers that Gregory Green finally snapped. What followed was a night of absolute horror that would change Faith's life forever. By September 2016, Faith Green had served her husband with divorce papers for the second time. Gregory Green knew his marriage was over.
On the 20th of September 2016, Green unleashed a nightmare on his unsuspecting family.
It started off as a normal day. It spiraled into Faith Green and Gregory Green having an argument over text messages about the state of their marriage and the fact that she had filed for divorce. By the time Faith Green returned to the house that day, Gregory Green had become consumed by anger.
I go to sleep, and I remember him coming into the girls' room because I was sleeping in their room. And he was like, come in the living room. It seemed serious, so I got up. I go into the living room, and I see my son in there, and I'm thinking in my head, like, he woke my son up so I can tell he was asleep. Greg takes out these big zip ties. I'd never seen zip ties that big in my life ever. I didn't even know they made them that big. So he's like, I want you to tie your mother up with this. So Chad is like, Greg, wait. Then he pulls the gun out. So I was like, Chad, just do what he says. So he made my son zip tie me, and then that's when he proceeded to zip tie my son. I was froze. I couldn't do anything. Kiara came to the living room looking like he's tripping. Like, what is wrong with him? Like, he done lost his mind. She has no clue what just happened. But he ends up zip tying her, and then he says he wants us to go to the basement. We just look at each other. The thoughts were so loud, like, go to the basement. We just look at each other, and then we go down to the basement, and then he made us lay down on the floor, duct tape our mouths, duct tape around our arms, behind our back, ankles, and then he extra duct taped me a lot. I was thinking that he was just gonna take the girls and leave. That's what I was thinking. I never thought he was gonna do anything more than that. I thought he was really just trying to really just scare me.
Gregory Green had a mindset where, above everything else, he was entitled to things. He was superior. He was better. And if you didn't give him what he was entitled to, he would respond really, really badly, almost like a petulant toddler. But a petulant toddler is nowhere near as dangerous as a fully grown, violent man with access to weapons.
He sits down on the counter in the basement, and he says that I'm gonna suffer for what I did to him and his girls, and he doesn't want his girls raised by anybody in my family. I just felt so bad because I couldn't help us. What was I gonna do?
Green spent the next hour going in and out of the basement. When he returned for the final time, he turned his gun on 17-year-old Cara.
He shot her in the back twice, and she just looked at me. I'm yelling to him like, no, no, my baby. But I was begging him not to shoot her, because once he shot her in the back, she was bleeding from her mouth, and I knew she wasn't gonna make it.
He next turned the gun on Chadney. He shot Chadney twice in the back and once in the head.
And I remember him saying, ouch, and he rolled over, and he never moved again. Then he aimed a gun at me, and I remember just trying to brace myself because I didn't know where he was going to shoot me. And I just remember hearing gunshots. I remember that burning feeling. And then he grabbed my face. So I remember that, and then him, cutting me from the side. I didn't feel it, but I could just feel the warmth of the blood, and I could see blood squirting.
He spared Faith's life because he wanted her to suffer and live through it and live with it. It is an unimaginable burden for anyone to bear. Can you imagine any mother watching the death of her children in front of her by a man she's married and thought she could trust?
It's fascinating from a law enforcement psychological standpoint to try to understand what Mr. Green actually was thinking that caused him to go to those lengths. What was it that you thought by sitting your wife down, killing her children in front of her, you were going to accomplish? That was the question that reigned in my mind for a long time after.
In an eerie echo of the night 25 years earlier when he'd murdered his first wife, Green then called the police and confessed to his crime.
I heard him walk up the stairs and said, "Hi, my name is Gregory Green," and that's all that I could hear. Then I heard the door close.
I was woken up by the sergeant that was working on the road patrol and was apprised of the situation at that time. You almost want to think that this isn't real. Am I dreaming? The officers responded to the scene from the 911 call. Mr. Green was sitting on the porch. He was taken into custody without incident by the first responding officers, and that's when the officers then had the horrific task of going into the home and finding the crime scene.
I remember just laying there. Then it was a knock at the door, and it was the police.
Faith's children were shot to death in front of her. She had suffered a cutting wound from the top of her forehead area all the way down to her cheek, and she was also shot in the foot. I don't understand the mentality, but it seemed like torture to me. Obviously, our primary concern in that situation being there was no further danger to the community. We still have a victim that's alive, making sure that Faith was taken care of and sought medical aid that was needed.
On this side here, they had to stitch on the inside first and then stitch the outside. And if he would have cut me an inch further, I would have actually bled to death. And they said that my foot should have been shattered in a lot of pieces, but luckily the bullet curved and went out the bottom.
Faith had survived her husband's attack. But her nightmare wasn't over. Even more horrifying news was still to come. On September the 21st, 2016, Gregory Green had forced his wife to watch as he shot and killed her 2 teenage children. But as Faith was about to find out, they weren't the only murders he'd committed that night.
What became apparent was what Green was doing when he left his wife and 2 elder children tied up in the basement.
He had already prepared the car in the garage of the home, meaning he had fastened a piece of PVC pipe on the tailpipe of the vehicle, ran a hose into the window of the car. He went into the house, lifted the 2 girls one by one out of their beds. They were asleep. One of the children briefly woke up, but her daddy was holding her, so she fell back asleep. He carried the 2 girls out to the car, placed them in the car, tucked them in, shut the door, and turned the car on.
This was just incomprehensible to me.
During this whole process, Gregory Green would leave Coy and Kaylee in the car, and then he would go into the basement to check on Kara and Chadney and Faith to make sure they were still down there. He didn't tell them at that time what was happening upstairs. After a period of time, Gregory Green went back out to the garage. He checked on the 2 youngest girls. They appeared to be lifeless. He turned the car off, and then he carried them one by one back into the house and tucked them in bed together.
Soon after being rushed to hospital, Faith learned the true extent of what her husband had done to Coy and Kaylee.
One of the doctors told me that they had passed, but I remember the police saying that the little one is fighting. I didn't know what was going on, but Kaylee was the last to go. So they wheeled me to one room, and I saw Coy. She was gone. She was just so cold. And then they wheeled me to another room, and Kaylee, she was, still warm.
There was a lot of the officers on scene that were just not believing this. You can't believe that this happened, but you put your feelings aside and you have a job to do and a crime scene to process, an investigation to conduct, and you move forward.
Now in custody, Gregory Green was questioned by police.
During the course of his several-hour statement, he spoke about the details of the crime and his reasons for doing this. He repeatedly referenced the fact that Faith Green had filed for divorce. He repeatedly referenced the fact that she was going to take his house and he was going to have to pay child support, and he would have nothing and he would starve and he wouldn't have his girls. He repeatedly indicated during the course of his statement that he had no choice. He had to do this. The lack of emotion, the lack of conscience, the matter-of-factness in which Gregory Green detailed to the detectives what he had done to these children.
What I found most troublesome about Mr. Green was there was a statement that alluded to the fact that he felt his children were better off in heaven with God than being raised by her. That was his logic behind taking the lives of his children.
In this incident, Gregory Green had every opportunity to also murder Faith Green, and he intentionally did not do that. The detectives asked him, "Why didn't you kill her?" And his words were, "Death would have been too good for her. I wanted her to live with what she made me do." It's the ultimate act of power and control. Gregory Green knew at the time he did these things he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and he was resigned to that fact. But he wanted Faith Green to suffer forever, and allowing her to live was his way of guaranteeing in his mind that he could control her and make her suffer forever.
That's the personification of evil, and shows us exactly what his motivations were. His motivation was to punish Faith for having the audacity to leave him.
In the days following the murders, the story hit the press. It was only then that Faith learned the awful truth about her husband's first wife.
I was on my dad's phone, and that was like the first thing that popped up. She was about 6, 7 months pregnant, and he stabbed her to death. And I was just thinking like, oh my God, and I'm just crying like, because I never knew. I'm just bawling my eyes out. I'm just sick to my stomach.
Faith found it hard to come to terms with the parole board's previous decision to release Green.
He actually shouldn't have ever been let out. He was never rehabilitated. He just told them what they wanted to hear, because he has a demeanor where people like him, they gravitate toward him, and he used that to his advantage.
Faith's whole life had been destroyed in one night by the husband who claimed to love her. But there was still one piece of news she was yet to hear that would once again rock her to the core.
One of the terrible ironies of this case is that Faith was in hospital recovering from the torture from Green when she heard it was her own father who'd helped him get out of jail. Imagine the shock that must have been to the young woman.
I found out just like everyone else did that my father had wrote letters for my ex-husband to help him get out of prison. For a long time, I didn't want anything to do with my father. I probably pushed my family away at some point too, and vice versa, because they weren't understanding what I was going through. I mean, I didn't understand what I was going through. How do you really put your head around losing 4 children? I was on a lot of medication. I was spiraling out of control, you know.
Gregory Green was charged with a litany of felonies for the Dearborn Heights massacre, including 4 counts of first-degree murder.
It was a very strong case because it almost came down to a point where once we did our protocol and procedures with Mr. Green confessing to committing the homicides, having the victims, having a live witness that witnessed everything, there's really not much to argue.
What the investigation showed was that approximately a week prior to the murders, he had gone to a local hardware store here in Michigan. He had purchased the PVC pipe that he used on the car, the plastic tubing he used on the car, the zip ties, and duct tape. During his interrogation, Gregory Green admitted that he knew he was going to do something. He just didn't know when he was going to do it.
I think it would be a difficult argument for any defense attorney to make, regardless of whether he had bought it days earlier. The mere fact that his children died from carbon monoxide poisoning shows premeditation.
Ultimately, a plea offer was extended by the prosecutor's office to Gregory Green, whereby he would plead guilty to 4 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of torture, 1 count of assault with intent to do great bodily harm, and 1 count of felony firearm. The plea offer in this case took into account the objectives of Faith Green, primarily that Gregory Green spend the rest of his natural life in prison. This plea offer also took into account the trauma that a trial would cause to Faith Green in having to relive and testify about witnessing the murders of her children.
On March the 1st, 2017, approximately 6 months after he'd murdered his 2 daughters and his 2 stepchildren, Gregory Green was back in court for his sentencing hearing.
To her immense credit, Faith turned up at Green's sentencing and indeed called him out in front of the jury and the judge. She said, "You're a con man, you're a monster, and you're the devil in disguise."
She was very brave and very strong, and she was there speaking for her children.
I wanted to be face to face with him if it were my choice. You know, that's why I kept looking at him, even though it was the back of his head, because to let him know how I felt so he could see my eyes, feel my pain.
I don't recall Mr. Green ever looking at Faith Green and making eye contact with her. I recall him sitting and just looking straight forward as she delivered her remarks, with no emotion on his face.
Mr. Green was ready to go back to prison. You know, he was like, I did it. I turned myself in. Can we just go now? He felt he was mission accomplished. It was like, I killed my kids. I did what I did. Put me in jail. Just unfathomable.
There was no remorse, no shame, no guilt. And he kept talking about how God would look after him. So he's still got that massive ego there that I'm special and I will be forgiven and God is going to look after me. I mean, the extent of that man's ego is absolutely staggering.
For Faith, I don't know how she sat through those court hearings looking at that person that just took her children.
I was awed by her ability to stand up and face her abuser, face the man who had done this to her, and never once waver. From the moment I met her, I knew she was a very strong woman. She was committed to finding justice for her children from day one.
I just had to let him know I wasn't scared of you, and, you know, you did these things to hurt me because I wouldn't stay in your box because you wanted to control me, and I wouldn't give in to him. And I'm still not giving in to him, even though my children aren't here, but I still continue to fight for them.
Gregory Green was sentenced to serve 45 to 100 years in prison, plus an additional 2-year term for the firearms charge.
I think it was the judge who said, a father is there to protect his children and a husband is there to protect his wife. Green did neither.
He was 50 years old at the time, so when we did the math, I, as a prosecutor, understood he would not be eligible for parole until he was 97 years old. And that would be the first time parole could even be considered. So, in effect, it was my belief that he would die in prison.
The wounds that Faith suffered, she may have recovered from the physical injuries, but the emotional injuries and the sheer effect on her will never go away. They cannot possibly. It is an unimaginable nightmare.
I can't ever let him win, so I'm going to keep honoring my children. I talk about them all the time. I have so many stories and pictures. I did so much with them. I enjoyed my children. I enjoyed being a mom. My children would be proud of how far I've come because they wouldn't want me to be sulking. They would want me to be happy.
Gregory Green murdered his family not once, but twice. He stabbed his first wife to death, killing not only her, but their unborn child too. Then, 25 years later, after his release from prison, he shot and killed his 2 stepchildren in front of their mother, and gassed his own 2 daughters, who were just 4 and 5 years old. His name is now synonymous with unimaginable family betrayal and tragedy, leaving no doubt that Gregory Green is one of the world's most evil killers.